Good evening, everyone, and welcome here to Nesamim, to this 10-day retreat titled Shamatha and Vipashyana retreat. So, of course, my name's Glen Svensson. I think some of you know me already, maybe some of you don't. So maybe just a few words about myself before we begin. So I was, of course, born in Australia, grew up in Australia, went to university there, had a Bachelor of Science in IT, so I started off working life in IT field for about 12 years. Then I ended up doing a little bit of travelling around the world and ended up doing my first course in Buddhism in '95 at Tushita Meditation Centre in Dharamsala, and then did two of these well-known one-month Kopan courses the year after that. And then I went on to do a 7-year study program, master's program in Buddhist studies in Italy. I finished that in 2004. Did a little bit of a retreat for about a year or so, and then since 2006 or so, I've been running around the world, teaching and leading retreats. Spent a lot of time, of course, in Dharamsala and Tushita Meditation Centre for many years, and the last 3 or 4 years now I'm more based in Europe, but still going to India a little bit every year as well. I think this is my 4th or 5th visit here to Israel now. I've lost count. Of course, my very first visit here was way back in 1985 as a backpacker. Enjoyed my time there as well. So just a little bit about this retreat. So I think you're all familiar with the schedule, but just to run through the schedule again so we have it clear. We need some more volume. Like that. Better? One? No? It's going, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Is that too loud? Is that better? Good? Good? Okay. So this evening, of course, we've just got an introduction session. That's a bit of feedback there. And then tomorrow, for the next 8 days, we have the same schedule. So there'll be, I think, a wake up at 6 o'clock. Then 6:30 till 7. Sydney will be leading some yoga, so everyone knows Sydney. Yeah. So to wake you up a little bit, stretch the body a bit in the morning, and then at 7:15, that's in here, yeah. The yoga in the morning, yeah. And then at 7:15 till 8 o'clock, there'll be a morning meditation. So Maya will be leading that meditation in Hebrew, so it'll be a very good opportunity for you to do some of these meditations in your native language. And so that will take us till 8 o'clock, so breakfast will be at 8. And then the first morning session will be here at 9:30 till 10:45, and then a morning tea break till 11:15, and then the 11:15, and then 11:15 till 12:30 will be the second session. Lunch will be at 12:30, 2-hour break at lunch till 2:30. Then the first afternoon session from 2:30 till 3:45. Then a half an hour tea break till 4:15. And then again 1 hour yoga session with Suki here from 4:15 to 5:15. And then a short break till 5:30. And then 5:30 to 6:30, last afternoon session here. And then we have dinner at 6:30. And then the last evening session will be from 8 till 9. So that's the same program for each of the next 8 days. And then the last day, we'll go through more or less the same schedule in the morning, and we finish in the retreat at 12 o'clock on the last day. And there's a small adjustment for Sunday, because I think Sunday afternoon they need to use this, but you'll see it on the schedule, and we'll let you know on Sunday morning how that goes as well. Now, in this retreat, there are 2 main topics, of course, Shamatha and Vipashyana. Shamatha will be more or less the first half of the retreat, the second half will be Vipashyana. And then throughout the retreat, to give us some balance of both Shamatha and Vipashyana, we'll be doing some work on the compassion wing of practice. That'll be in every session after lunch to give that balance to these 2 practices. And in each of the sessions, I'll be talking about the practices that we're going to be doing. We'll be doing the meditations, of course, and then you get some opportunity to sort of ask some questions about either the theory or the practice in each of those sessions as well. Materials, I think you've all got the materials now, so there's various charts in there that we'll be referring to as we go through the retreat, so keep them handy during the sessions. Of course, we're going to be running this retreat in silence. Silence will start after this session this evening and go right through till breakfast on the last day. And the silence, of course, is there for your benefit, to help you to really get the most out of this retreat. It's a wonderful opportunity to spend 8 or 9 days in silence, and I think in our modern world it's actually very rare to even have an opportunity to be silent for 1 day, let alone for 8 or 9 days. And so it's a wonderful experience just for that itself, but also I think you're going to find that by maintaining that silence well, you'll get much more out of the retreat, out of the meditations as well, and you'll learn a lot more about yourself. So of course, if you start to talk, you'll dissipate the energy, you won't get nearly as much out of the retreat, and also you'll disturb the people around you. So really maintain that silence well. I think there's some other people in this venue that are not part of the retreat. Of course, I'll be talking, so just let them be, and keep you in your own space. So I think probably Ellen has gone through a lot of logistics. Is there any questions about any logistics matters before we start with a brief introduction? Okay about that? So let's now have a little brief introduction to the 2 main aspects of this retreat, Shamatha and Vipashyana. So both of those, of course, are Sanskrit terms. When Buddhism first spread from India centuries ago, of course, it spread through 2 main languages, Pali and Sanskrit. And throughout this retreat, I'll often bring in Sanskrit terms. The reason being is they're very precise in meaning, and often when these words are translated into English or other languages, there's no word in those languages which has the same precise meaning, so we end up with terms that are not very precise, and a lot of confusion simply comes from terminology difficulties. So there's a number of terms I'll be going back to the Sanskrit and really clearly defining that, and so we have a clear understanding of those terms. So of course the first one here is Shamatha. And Shamatha we can divide into 2 parts, Shama and Ta. Shama means calm,
So here we're talking about a calm mind, a mind that's not full of discursive thoughts. And ta means to remain or abide. So it means here a mind that is abiding, i.e. focused single-pointedly on an object. So shamatha is often translated into English as calm abiding. So we're talking about not only having a calm mind, but a mind that is abiding, is concentrating single-pointedly on the object. So of course what we're talking here about is cultivating a calm, clear and focused mind. So this is simply the practice of developing attention skills, our ability to concentrate, our ability to focus. And shamatha is a particular level of concentration we're cultivating in the spiritual path. But the practice itself is often simply referred to as shamatha practice. So shamatha practice is simply the concentration practice to develop our ability to focus, to concentrate. Vipashyana probably many of you are more familiar with the Pali term Vipashyana. In both of those words, we can divide into two. The VI prefix means higher, and Pashyana or Pasana means to see. So literally means higher seeing, seeing beyond. And this is usually translated into English as insight or special insight. So of course what we're talking here about is gaining insight into the nature of reality. So Vipashyana practice is all about coming to see reality as it is, to gain an insight into the nature of reality. So why are these two practices important? So if we go back to shamatha, shamatha, of course, is all about developing our attention skills. So of course, in everyday life, having good attention skills is very important, because if we can't focus well because we're either distracted or very dull, then we're not very effective at work, we're not effective in anything we do in life. And that often leads to a lot of agitation and stress, and it leads to a lot of mental imbalance. And due to that as well, we end up being the slaves of our own mind. We often end up being tormented and overwhelmed by our thoughts, emotions and memories and so forth. And then also, when a lot of these things come up and we don't know how to deal with them, not unpleasant thoughts or unpleasant emotions, unpleasant memories, then often what we do is we try and suppress them because we don't know how to deal with them. And just suppressing, of course, often leads to a lot of physical health problems, and then we project a lot of negativity onto others. And then also, we often end up with sleep problems as well due to that. And we find that we're actually not really enjoying the simple pleasures in life as much as we could. Whereas if we do this shamatha practice, if we improve our attention skills, then of course we'll be much more effective at work, we'll be much more effective in everything we do in our life, much less agitation and stress, much better mental balance, and you'll find that instead of being the slaves of your mind, we'll become the masters of our own mind. And often even we get a lot of health benefits and find we sleep better as well. And then also we tend to enjoy the simple pleasures in life much more than we do now. So that's at a very everyday life level, but of course here in the context of Buddhism, what is the role of shamatha? Where does Buddhism fit there? In Buddhism, we can talk about three core areas of practice called the three higher trainings. The first is ethics, and this is simply avoiding any harmful behaviour. So this is sort of the foundation, and I think it's really the foundation of any sort of meaningful lifestyle, just to have an ethical lifestyle to avoid harmful behaviour. And then on that basis, we engage in the concentration practice to develop single-pointed concentration. And so here, of course, this concentration practice we're calling Shamatha. So this concentration practice is often just called Shamatha practice because that's the level of concentration we're trying to cultivate. And then on that basis, we engage in the wisdom practice to gain insight. So of course here, this wisdom practice, we're giving the name Vipashyana or Vipassana practice. So what we see here is that Shamatha is the basis of Vipashyana. In fact, Shamatha is the basis of all other practices, because if we don't have a very calm, clear, focused mind, you'll find not only Vipassana practices, but even compassion practices and other practices won't work very well because our mind is distracted or very dull. So Shamatha is the basis of Vipashyana, and that's why, of course, we are focusing on Shamatha in the first half of the retreat, so to develop a little bit of focus, a bit more calm, clear, focused mind, and then we're going to apply that in the second half to investigate, to gain insight into nature of reality. So when we talk about Vipashyana, why is this important? Why is it important to gain an insight into the nature of reality? Of course, the Buddhist assertion is that it's our distorted view of reality that is the root cause of our mental afflictions, like attachment, anger, jealousy, craving, and so forth, and all of our suffering. So if we want to overcome our mental afflictions and suffering, we need to go to the underlying cause. And the Buddhist assertion, of course, is, and we'll be looking at that in detail in the second half of the retreat, is our distorted view of reality. And we distort reality in a number of ways. In the second half of the retreat, we'll be looking at 4 particular distortions. The first way in which we distort reality is we see things which are changing as unchanging. And of course here this word changing is the idea of impermanence. And actually here is one place we have to be careful of terminology. That we could say here, seeing things which are impermanent as permanent, but I prefer not to write that because it often creates confusion. Because for us, when we use the word permanent and impermanent, normally when we say permanent, we mean last forever, or at least last a long time, and impermanent means it doesn't last very long. That's not the meaning here. So permanent and impermanent is not really telling us how long something lasts, it's simply telling us, is that thing changing from one moment to the next or not? If it's not, permanent. If it is, it's impermanent. So literally the word coming from Sanskrit Tibetan is changing and unchanging. But you might say, well, I don't have that distorted view because I know that everything I experience is changing moment by moment because science has proven it and I accept that. So I don't have that distorted view. Here, we're not talking, this distorted view, we're not talking intellectual, we're talking experiential. Yes, maybe pretty well everyone in this room intellectually accepts everything's changing moment by moment. The science has proven that. But is that how we relate to things in our behaviour? Or do we relate to things as if they're actually quite stable and not really changing much? I think that's how we relate to them. So we are holding on to things as quite stable and unchanging. So that's a distortion. The second one is that we tend to see pleasurable experiences as happiness. And of course the Buddhist assertion is that pleasurable experiences are not in the nature of happiness. But because we grasp onto pleasurable experiences as nature of happiness, we have a lot of mental afflictions and suffering as a result. The third distortion is we tend to see where there is no self, a self. What this means is this word self here is referring to an overinflated false sense of me. So we're not saying that there's no me. That's not what no self means. There is a me. There's no Buddhist tradition, of course, says there's no me. The me, we exist. The question is, how do we exist? Now we overinflate the sense of me. We're grasping onto what's called self. And from a Buddhist perspective, that self doesn't exist. How we do that, of course, we'll look at in a lot of detail. And the last one, which we're going to spend a lot of time on in the second half, is we tend to see things which are dependent as independent. And again, like the first one here, I think pretty well all of us in this room, at some level or another, accept the idea of interdependency. We see it operating in climate change, all sorts of things. We see that happen. So intellectually, I think most of us, pretty well all of us in this room, accept the idea that things are interdependent. But again, is that how we relate to things? Probably not. I think instinctively there really seems to be an independent me here and an independent objective world out there. And that, from a Buddhist perspective, is a distortion. So these are four ways in which we distort reality. So therefore, of course, we're going to be looking at four insights in the Vipashyana practice to overcome these. So the first one, of course, the first insight will be the insight into impermanence. The second insight is what's called an insight into suffering. The third insight to overcome this is an insight into no self. And the fourth one is an insight into emptiness. So maybe we can write those up here. So these are the four insights that we will be cultivating in our Vipashyana practice in the second half of the retreat to overcome these four distorted views. Any questions so far? Anytime you have questions, of course, just raise your hand. I like to be interactive, so if there's something you don't understand, then ask questions and we'll continue that. So again, this is just an introduction, of course. So that's in the second half of this retreat, we'll be engaging in Vipashyana practice. We'll be looking at these 4 distortions and then cultivating these 4 insights to overcome these 4 distorted views. And of course, the whole purpose again for that is to overcome our mental afflictions like craving, attachment, jealousy, anger, fear, anxiety, and so forth, and all of our suffering. So therefore, the goal of this retreat is to learn and practice these various Shamatha and Vipashyana practices that we're going to introduce. Learn how to integrate them into our daily life so that we can bring these into daily life as well. So therefore, not to have any unrealistic expectations in this retreat or having some profound meditative experiences. If that's our expectation, we're probably just going to have a lot of frustration and disappointment. So again, in this retreat, we're really just looking to understand the theory, practice the meditations, learn how to do the meditations properly, and then also how to bring these practices into our daily life so that when we go home, we can do the meditations and we can bring these into daily life as well. So what I recommend for this retreat is have a nice relaxed approach. And if anything comes up in meditation, don't make a big deal out of it. We often have a lot of different experiences in meditation, but those experiences are sort of a byproduct. They're not really what we're doing in the practice, so not make a big deal out of anything pleasant or strange or unpleasant. Just let it go, let it go, let it go. And just a nice relaxed approach. And of course, I'm not assuming any understanding or experience, so in either of these 2 practices, so we're going to go from the ground up in both of those areas of practice. So those of you who are maybe complete beginners, it's okay, and those of you who have some experience in these 2 areas, it's also okay because it's good review. Maybe you can go a little bit deeper into those practices as well. So we're catering for complete beginners and also those who are established in these practices as well in this retreat. So that's basically a brief overview of the 2 main areas of practice. And again, as I mentioned earlier, to balance both of these practices, we need to really engage in some compassion type practices, because both of these practices are very sort of inner practices. And if we only practice these, there can be a tendency to become a little bit self-absorbed and a bit disconnected. So we don't want that to happen, so we're going to balance both of these with the compassion wing of practice. That's the session after lunch. We're going to be looking at cultivating things like loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, and so forth, and overcoming the selfish state of mind as well. So these are the practices we're going to engage in after lunch to give a balance to both the Shamatha and the Vipashyana. So that's a brief introduction into the main areas of this retreat. Any questions on any of that before we now start looking at the Shamatha practice a little bit this evening? Okay. So let's look at how we train in this Shamatha practice.